Once you were old enough. What were the dark family secrets you were finally let in on? Got a Facebook message from one guy asking if I was related to my dad. Since it's not a common last name. I thought he was a fan of his work. Because I was in college at the time and the guy was about the same age as me. And that's how I found out my dad slept around and that I had a half-brother the same age as me. My grandfather killed his youngest brother to get out of going to Vietnam. His brother, and two of their friends had their numbers called in the draft for Vietnam. They didn't want to go. Obviously. But they didn't come from money and all work to support their families. If they got arrested they'd lose their jobs and their families would lose their income. So they decided on a different plan to get out of going. They would drive to get their medical checks together. And on the way there they would drive the car into a tree. The plan was to get too injured to get sent to war. But not so injured as to be permanently crippled. And it had to look like an accident so nobody got arrested. This was in country Western Australia. So they were all going to say they swerved to miss a kangaroo. And hit the tree. My grandfather was driving. His friend was in the passenger seat. And the other two were in the back. His brother was behind the passenger seat. They hit the tree doing about 40 kilometers per hour, enough to be serious. A broken leg for my grandfather. A broken arm for the guy behind him. And broken ribs all around. They definitely weren't going to war. The problem was that for maximum impact. And because this was rural Australia in the 60s. They weren't wearing seatbelts. And nobody found them or their car for an hour or so. And nobody considered internal injuries in this plan. And my grandfather's brother bled to death from a ruptured spleen in the back seat. He was dead before they got to a hospital. My grandfather never forgave himself. And he never talked about it. My grandma was the only one he ever told. As far as we know. And she didn't tell my mother and I until long after his death. We found a small box in their bedroom when we were cleaning out the house after she died last year. It had a clipping from the local newspaper at the time about the accident. It said that they had swerved to miss a roo. And called it a tragedy. I don't think my mother told any of her siblings. So technically this is still the family secret. I guess now you're all in on it. Not very much a secret. But took me until I was older to understand what was happening. My mom would sometimes have us play a game called Army which consisted of me, my mom, and my siblings army crawling around our apartment. Kind of a hide-and-seek style game. She would yell hit the deck randomly and we would all drop and find a hiding spot. We would giggle and giggle while my mom army crawled around looking for us. We loved the game so much. I realized a few years ago while retelling the story that we lived in a really terrible neighborhood. And she would yell it out when she heard gunshots outside the building. I'm assuming she was worried about stray bullets. Undefined. Your mom is a peeping G. War vet. Single mom of 3. Worked her way up in life from bartending to union plumber foreman to owning her own gunsmithing shop with my stepdad. She's a strong woman. My father met my mother in the Philippines when he was stationed there in the Navy. He married her there and conceived me. He went away to finish his tour of duty. My mother moved to America when she was a month away from giving birth to me. She moved in with relatives in Texas. My father's tour ended while he was in Hawaii. He met a woman there and called my mom in America, asking for a divorce. He wanted to take back his recent marriage to her, with a kid on the way, because he had a hot one-night stand. My mother was already scared. Being in a new country. Not knowing much English. Add to this that she was pregnant. About to give birth. And her husband was dumping her. My Texan uncle got on a plane to Hawaii. Prepared to kick my father's ass. He somehow talked my father into being a man and taking responsibility for his wife and child. The fact that the fling dumped his ass surely helped. He was back by the time I was born. I learned all this when I was 11. Around the time my parents got divorced. It was only the first of countless dark family secrets I would come to learn during my teenage years. This might be the first story I read here where the uncle is the good guy in the teller's point of view. My grandfather got out of serving in Vietnam by robbing pharmacies and going to jail for years. Wow. Mine got out of it by telling the Navy that he could type. So he remained stateside and typed reports or something for his unit. He said he was one hell of a two-fingered typist. When I was about 10, my cousin and his dad died. I always thought it was an accident and on the same day. When I was old enough, I was told that his dad actually committed suicide and my cousin followed him couple months later. Truly devastated me, although I didn't know them well. Undefined. I'm so sorry. I know of a similar story. When I was a senior in high school 2006 to 2007, one of my classmates lost her dad to suicide over winter break. Poor girl was so close to him. And it took her a couple of months to feel mentally okay enough to come back to school. She had just gotten back into a regular school routine when one day, she was pulled out of class. Her older brother had committed suicide. That was it for her. And she finished her schoolwork at home for the rest of the year. Obviously it was beyond devastating for her, her older sister, and their mother. And it broke our hearts that while the rest of us were doing prom, prepping for graduation and college, etc., she was at home wrestling with deep grief. From what I can tell on Facebook, they are all doing well today. But man, I can't imagine what it was like to be the people most directly affected by that situation. My grandmother tried to murder my grandfather when she got sick of him beating the speep out of her every day. She swung an axe at him and he blocked it with his hand and lost his thumb. She left him before I was born. That my cousin was actually my half-brother. Mom got pregnant in college and my aunt and uncle adopted him. And that my dad wasn't my biological father. Mom and dad got divorced. She got pregnant by another man. And my dad wasn't able to have kids of his own, so they got remarried and he raised me as his own. There are 2 posts here about a cousin that is also a half-brother. And if you put the 2 together, what do you get? A full brother. When I was young, I thought it was really nice that my Nana lived with my aunt and her family since she was getting on a bit and it meant she was looked after and there were always people around. Aunt has 6 kids. Occasionally Aunt would gripe about being the one looking after Nana since Aunt is also one of many kids, and being young I sympathized, but given they all spent loads of time with Nana too, didn't think it was a big deal. You don't think about financial responsibility when you're young, I think. Just social and caring. Well, it turns out the reason Nana lives with Aunt is because Aunt and her husband convinced Nana to put the house in their name so they could look after her affairs, and sold it out from under her and invested the money in a pyramid scheme, so it's gone now. Because of this, her siblings refused to give Aunt a penny towards looking after Nana since it's her fault. Nana has no money or assets and instead pay to take Nana out all the time. Meals, shopping, activities, so she doesn't go without, but they let Aunt struggle under the weight of Nana's general living expenses. Aunt's kids are all independent now, so they are not going to be impacted by money problems. Now I look back at her griping with annoyance and think what a terrible person she is. My aunt and cousin did something similar to my Nan. Nan passed with virtually nothing to her name because my cousin had been made her next of kin and controlled the bank account, while allegedly receiving a carer's allowance for my aunt. And Aunt and the cousin that was complicit, the other 2 cousins have nothing to do with them, wound up moving to another state because they'd amassed one too many debts. They ripped my folks and I off. It was easy for me to cut them out of my life. But leaving their own mother and grandmother with nothing was beyond the pale. I'm glad your aunt's siblings do the right thing by your Nana. I'm sorry to hear that. It's awful what some people can do to their own family, especially the vulnerable members. It was surreal as a kid. She would have a moan and no one would react. It was like she hadn't spoken. I thought they were judging her for complaining or maybe felt guilty but didn't want to help her. Turns out they had decided not to keep conflicting with her over it for Nana's sake, as it upset her if they argued over it since it's done now, and instead stonewalled anything she mentioned that was about or as a result of her actions. I guess part of that was not mentioning it to the next generation. I found out from someone who married in and then divorced back out of the family who I'm on very good terms with, and even then only because I asked what they thought of the weird situation. Leave a like and a comment if you liked the video. Check out more Reddit related video, I am posting them daily. Subscribe to see more Reddit content.